Good morning Year 4, and this is your maths video for if you've got this booklet on Wednesday the 3rd of February. Now before we get started today, I'm going to say one very big well done, and that's to Dion. Thank you for challenging me back on TT Rockstars. I'll make sure that I set you a harder challenge next time. Now yesterday we started looking at fractions. Okay, and we learned that fractions were part of a whole. Okay, we talked about how we can write fractions using a numerator, the number on the top, which is how many we have, and the denominator, which is the number on the bottom, and that's how many pieces there are in the whole. Okay, now just before we move on to our warm-up game, I just wanted to tell you how we say some of these fractions, because we don't say 1/2s. Okay, so if we've got a 2 at the bottom, we say that fraction as a half. Okay, and that's very similar to when we were dividing by 2, isn't it? We've cut something in half, we've got 2 lots of them. If the denominator is a 3, we say that as a third, so 1/3, or if we've got 2 of those pieces, we would say 2/3. And then if the bottom number is a 4, that means we've cut our whole into 4 pieces. We say that as quarters, and we can have either 1/4, 2/4, or 3/4 before we get to a whole. Okay, so we're going to start by playing our game, and it's called Level Up. Don't worry, I will send the link out to you on Marvellous Me so that you can play along at home as well. So, level 1. We've got some fractions here that are represented visually using a diagram. And we've now got to represent it using our numerators and denominators. So, how many pieces have I got shaded here? Okay, so I've got 1. So let's grab a 1. And then how many is there all together? There's 2. So we've got 1/2. Remember, that's how we say it when there's a 2 as our denominator. Let's see if we're right. Brilliant. Next one then. So how many pieces do we have? We've got 2. Out of how many all together? 3, so we would say that one, because it's been split into 3 pieces, 2/3. And then finally then, how many pieces do we have shaded? 1. And how many pieces are there all together? There are 3. And we would say that as 1/3. Are we ready for level 2? Okay, so this time they're not represented using circles, they're represented using rectangles, but we can still use our fractions to help us. So, looking at the first one, then the red one, how many pieces are shaded? 1. And how many pieces are there all together? 2. Brilliant. How would we say that one? Can you remember? You might want to use my clues underneath the board to help you. We'd say it as a half. Well done. Okay, next one, then you'll have to look really carefully at your screen to see this one. So how many are shaded? We've got 1. And how many are there all together? There are 4. And we would say that one as 1/4, because the denominator is 4. Let's see if we're right. Super. And then finally, how many are shaded? 2. And how many are there all together? There are 4. So we would say that one as 2/4. Now I'm not going to go any further, but please let me know when your parent or carer or whoever you live with sends in your picture what level you got to. So, your learning question today then, Year 4, says, can I use visual representation, so that's pictures, to find fractions fractions of amounts. Okay, so you'll notice here that I've got some caps, some blue caps with yellow stars on the front, and it wants me to find 1/2 of them. And remember, because our denominator is a 2, that means I'm going to have 2 different groups. Okay, now to do this, you might want to use whatever you used last week when we were dividing. So if that was counters or pieces of pasta, or I used my gems. Or we can use our 2 times table to help us. But first, we need to know how many caps there are all together. So count along with me. I want to hear you even if you're at home. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So there are 8 caps all together. My whole is 8. And I now need to find half of it. So remember, we can use our 2 times tables to help us when we are finding halves. And we can count up in 2s until we get to the number 8. Let's have a go together. 2, 4, 6, 8. So half of 8 equals 4. And there I've just circled 4 of the caps. Okay. Now the next one is asking you to find 1/3. Okay, so if here we used our 2 times tables, what times tables do you think we can use to help us when finding 1/3? Have you figured it out? It's our 3's, isn't it? Well done. So let's start by counting how many trainers we've got. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then let's count in our 3's until we get to 6. 3, 6. Okay, so 1/3 of 6 is 2. And I'm going to circle 2. Okay, so if to find a half we used our 2 times tables, if to find 1/3 we used our 3 times tables, what times table are we going to use if we are finding a quarter? We're going to use our 4's. Brilliant. So let's start by counting our tennis balls. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. So we've got 20 and we're going to count in our 4's until we get to that number. 4, 8, 12, 16 and 20. So 5 times. So I'm going to circle 5 balls. Okay, so now we're going to have a little look at your activity for today. And you're going to start by turning to page 18. Okay then, Year 4. So question 1 is asking you to colour in the right number of shapes. So you'll need a different coloured pencil or a pen, whatever you can find at home. If you haven't got any colours, you could even use your writing pencil as well. And it's asking you to colour in half of the circles. So let's start by finding out how many circles there are all together. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 circles all together. And we've got to share that by 2. We've got to half it. So let's count on our 2's until we get to 12 and then colour in that amount of circles. Okay, it's just like what I did on the board, but instead of colouring, I drew a ring around mine. You're going to colour in the right amount. So we've got 12. And remember that when we are halving, we're dividing by 2. Okay, next one then. So now you've got to colour in a third of the squares. Let's start by counting how many squares there are. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So we've got 6 squares. And remember that when we're finding thirds, we can use our 3 times tables to help us. So count in 3s until you get to 6. And then colour in that many squares. And then finally, year 4, a quarter of the triangle. So let's start by counting our triangles. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We've got 8 triangles. And remember, we're going to use our 4 times tables to help us count in 4s until you get to 8. You might want to pause the video now whilst you complete A, B and C. Okay, so your next question then, year 4, is asking you what fraction of the pictures are circled. So you can see here that I've got lots of little ginger cats, and there are 4 that have been circled. Now remember, whenever we write a fraction, our denominator, the number at the bottom, is how many there is all together. So how many cats do I have all together? Let's count them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So our denominator is 8, because that's how many there are all together. And how many do I have? How many are circled? 4. Brilliant. So that is the fraction of the picture that is circled. But we can do something to make this fraction a little bit easier to work with. Okay, now because both of these numbers are in my 2 times tables, I can halve them to make my fraction a little bit easier. So what is half of 4? What is half of 4? We did a halving race yesterday. We did some halving on Friday. So half of 4 is 2. And then what's half of 8? That's 4. Now are these numbers still in my 2 times table? They are. Okay, so what's half of 2? That's 1. And what's half of 4? That's 2. And all of these fractions mean the same. They're just a little bit easier to work with if they're like this one here. Okay, so I've got half of my picture circled. Let's have another go. Okay, so how many of my sunflowers are circled? There's 3, brilliant. And how many are there all together? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Okay, now because both of these numbers aren't in my 2s, I can't use my 2s to make my fraction a little bit easier. But are both of those numbers in my 3s? They are. So, let's see if we can count in 3s until we get to 3. 3. 1. And now let's count in 3s until we get to 12. 3, 6, 9, 12, 4. So, I've got 1/4 of my sunflowers circled. Okay, so if we go back to your activity booklet then, year 4. Question 2 is asking you what fraction of the moons are shaded. So So the first thing you need to do is to figure out how many there are all together. Okay, have you got that number? Brilliant, so that's your denominator at the bottom. And then your numerator is how many are shaded. How many do we have? Okay, so we've got 6. And how many are there all together? 18, super counting year 4. Now, are both of those numbers in my 2's? They are. So please use your 2 times tables to make this fraction a little bit easier to work with. Okay, don't worry if you can't, but please give it your best go. And the final kind of question that you've got in your booklet today says, each number is a quarter of a whole amount. So here I've got the number 2, and that number 2 is a quarter of the whole amount. And you can see that I've represented it visually as well. I've got my whole, and I've split it into 4 pieces because that's what a quarter is. And I've got 1/4 that's got 2 pieces. So now I need to add 2 more pieces to each of my quarters. So let's make my pen a little bit thicker. So each quarter has got the same amount now. And now if I counted all of my dots, it would tell me what the whole amount was. So how many dots are there all together? There are 8. So my whole amount is 8. Let's do one more before we go to your booklets. Okay, so this time it says that 1/4 equals 6. So just in one box, I've got to have 6 dots. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Then I've got to make sure that every quarter is the same. And then to find my whole amount, I've got to count all of those dots. How many are there, year 4? Want to see some super counting? There are 24 altogether. Each number below is a quarter of a whole amount. Write down the whole amount. So please do like I did and draw yourself a little grid. Okay, where you've got 4 boxes, because remember it's a quarter. The first one is 3. Make sure that each box has got 3. And then your whole amount is however many there are all together. Okay? Once you've completed all of your activity, I do have one final challenge for you, which is a true or false. I have shaded in 2/6 of these stars. True or false? And finally then, year 4, let's finish our lesson by reflecting on our learning today. Let's roll our dice. And it landed on a 5. Is there anything that you would do differently today? Don't forget to take a picture and send it to the year 4 email address.